O Instituto Olga Rabinovich traz ao Brasil, para o lançamento do projeto Paradiso, a analista de mercado Johanna Koljonen, que é responsável pelo Nostradamus Report, que está chegando esse ano à sua 6ª edição e é hoje uma referência para o setor audiovisual no mundo todo. O Nostradamus é produzido pelo Festival de Gotemburgo, na Suécia, e reúne uma série de entrevistas com especialistas do mercado audiovisual, e essas entrevistas são pontuadas pela Johanna, que analisa e solidifica essas informações, procurando dar ao leitor uma visão do presente e, sobretudo, do futuro do audiovisual. Um futuro bastante desafiante, com o streaming, com toda a mudança de hábito trazida pelas novas tecnologias. E o Brasil recebe o Nostradamus Report de 2019, antes mesmo da apresentação mundial no Festival de Cannes daqui a 2 meses.
It's funny, it was almost meant to be a very small internal thing. I was working with the Nordic film market, making programming, seminars and conferences for the industry who are gathering in Göteborg. And we found every year it was getting more and more difficult to know what is the most important thing to think about right now, because everything was so complicated and things were changing so fast. So we thought we have to do a little report for ourselves, just internal use only, to figure out the changes in the audiovisual marketplace. Now, in retrospect, of course, it's an enormous question. But then I thought, well, you know, let's put some weeks, I'll talk to some people, we'll write a report. And then we started the work, and it's like, no, this is so big. Of course, we're going to have to share the results. So when we do the research, we also give it to the industry locally. And the seminar becomes about what we found out in the report. Mm-hmm. Because the data that we use is mostly publicly available. Most of these things you can read in the newspapers or the trade papers, or you can go online and download free reports from different research institutions. And then we do very deep interviews with people who are in strategic positions in the industry. But if you're in the industry, you can talk to your colleagues about what they are thinking. So in a way, all of this data is available. But what we have is that we have the time to think about it, to organize it, and to zoom out a little bit and put it in the wider context of society and what is happening in the world. Well, we ask about their jobs. So people who work in very strategic positions, who are very cutting edge in what they do. Of course, you know, making film takes a long time. So our perspective is 3 to 5 years. And the people who are at the cutting edge, the things that they make today, the things that they're working on at their office today will shape everybody's reality 3 to 5 years from now. We don't predict the future, we describe what is already happening, right? That's a cheat. But also we ask slightly different questions. I ask the people, perhaps not so much what do you think will be the future, because then everybody reverts back to those opinions that they have already read in the papers. Instead we say, what are you excited about? What are you afraid of? What would you wish that everybody in the industry would have understood? What are your frustrations? And that paints a very different kind of picture of the same facts, and I find it very useful. So when we talk about the apocalypse, it was also the theme of the Göteborg Film Festival this year, because people are worrying about this a lot, and a lot of films are being made about this topic. So it was very suitable. But I think also it matches the facts. So there is a broader context for the political situation. We are living in a moment of global crisis, where because of climate change, the existence, the survival of civilization is also threatened. When in Europe, of course, in the last few years, we have been struck by migration, and it is seen by like a migration crisis. Of course, it's a humanitarian crisis. The war in Syria is very strongly affected by climate change. The people who are economic refugees, who are leaving their homes because it is impossible to farm, all of these are climate-related problems. The climate change, the climate crisis is already here. And in our countries, we see extreme weather events that become very expensive to solve, infrastructure problems. The summers, you know, are so hot and the winters are cold, all of these problems. This is the kind of environment where populism is an easy answer. So populists and ultranationalists are winning elections because people are afraid. And this is predictable. but it is also very dangerous because these are not the kind of parties that have long-term solutions. Often they don't even believe in science, and they don't have humanist values. So this is very, very bad for the very civilization that is under threat. This is an escalation of the problem. When populists and ultranationalists win elections, what almost always happens is that culture funding disappears very fast. And I learned that you have seen this here in Brazil. Almost overnight it disappears. This is so strange because culture money is a tiny little fraction of a budget of a country, but it has enormous symbolic value. It is very easy for a populist to point to that money and say, look, we are paying for this art, we are paying for these experiments, we are paying for these minority voices, we are paying for all of this that is bad for the country or whatever they think. So if you take that little money away, it has a big political gain for them, and it's a complete disaster for the art sectors because the money is very small, on a national level, but of course for the arts industries, it's completely vital. It funds everything we do. And it's not just when they win elections, because just the fact that they are successful means the other parties are also triangulating towards the right. So it becomes harder and harder to defend this money. It's very easy now to say, maybe we take this arts money and we put it in education. And that is, that's an argument that sounds like it makes sense. The problem is that, of course, when you take away those voices, you get a monoculture, and that is politically very dangerous, and it serves the populists. It is very difficult because, no, I shouldn't even say that it's difficult. We have to solve this problem. So it doesn't matter if it's difficult. We have to achieve this result. So it's an interesting problem, maybe. We have taken for granted for a very long time that it's obvious why the arts are important. Public funding of the arts is part of how almost all the welfare states are constructed. It's part of the whole package of social security and all of these things that are important to how our nations are run. So when people are questioning arts funding, they are also questioning things like equality and the fact that everybody should have access to the same kind of support. And that's a much bigger political conversation. But in actual fact, we need to be able to argue, not just emotionally or like in a historical context, of why public arts funding is important. And that means that we need to have some better metrics. Now, what should we measure? What is it that we measure? And it's funny that we can't answer this question. I am passionate about this, and I'm on the board of the Swedish Film Institute, and I work with public funding, also on funding bodies, listening to pitches, giving people money. And still it's very difficult for me to explain what is it that we're trying to achieve in society. I think that we are changing lives. I think that the kind of stories that we tell shape how people feel about themselves in their lives, about their identities, about belonging or not belonging to communities, about am I part of the project of this country or am I excluded from the project of this country, for instance. Populists know this. Populists are very good storytellers. It's just that they don't want to include everybody in the narrative. They only include some people, right? And I think that our job is to point to the public policy outcomes of this money and say, we have collectively invested this money because we believe that it has the following effects. It's good for mental health, it's good for physical health, it's good for democracy, it's good for it makes individual lives better in different ways. And 20 years ago, it was impossible to measure this. How do you measure how much a life has changed? But now we do have data. Advertisers measure very subtle things all the time about our behaviors and about our self-image and so on. If you can make targeted advertising to push a person on the internet, to radicalize them, for instance, or to push them towards some kind of worldview, if that is possible, it is possible to measure results also in the other direction. I don't know how to do this, but there are people in the world who know how to do this. So I think it is actually possible for us to make metrics that prove that the impact of art is real. This will not solve the problem with the populists because they don't want those results. If we say we are making everybody in this country feel like they are part of this country, a populist, that is completely contrary to their agenda. So that metric will not help. But I think in countries where this is still a debate, where we have not yet lost, there, if we get this in place, it's possible to future-proof a little bit, that when those elections, when the disastrous results happen, then maybe we can protect it. But it's a different question, is what do we do when the public money is already gone, or when there is nobody that you can really talk to about the most important results? That's a whole different question. It's the same everywhere. Yeah. The top titles take the top 10, 20, 30 titles take the utter majority of ticket sales. And then everybody else is a very long tail where each individual film has much smaller impact. Not because they're bad. But sometimes because they're bad. We make a lot of films that are not great. And I think maybe we have to stop doing that. But even the films that are great don't find a way to connect with their audience. Now, why do we make so many films? Part of it is, as you say, that the technological transformation, making films is cheaper, distributing films is cheaper, editing films is cheaper. A lot of things that used to be very difficult are now, actually, I mean, it's a cliche, but it is available. These tools are now available to everybody in theory. The skills are not available to everybody. That's why it's still important how the industry is diverse or not, right? But also there is a lot of public money because of tax rebate schemes all over the world. There has actually been a big influx of public money into practical production discounts through tax rebates or different kinds of tax incentives. And that money doesn't come often, typically it doesn't come from the Ministry of Culture, it comes from the Ministry of Finance because it's more of an industry stimulation package. And that money may be protected slightly longer than the arts money because it isn't symbolical in the same way. And I mean, it's very good for the industry that it's possible to make more films, but perhaps it has not translated in that the quality of all the films is as good. And we have to be self-critical about this. We have to be very earnest about, are we using this money as well as we could? Should we try to make a few Brazilian blockbuster films that are very expensive instead of 10 films that nobody will see, for instance? I don't know if that's a good idea here, because I don't know your industry that well, but certainly in the Nordic countries, I think it would be very interesting to see what would it mean. Because, you know, Hollywood are making their movies everywhere in the world. The craftsmen who are working on the sets and the talent who are working in the movies and everybody, they are not Americans usually. The skills to make these films are everywhere. And even in Hollywood, if you look at the names, the people come from all over the world and they go to Hollywood to work. Some of these people are Brazilian and some of them want to come home and make films here if they want to. And if it's anything like Sweden, a lot of the biggest hits are comedies, which can be great, but it's not maybe exactly the same. What would Brazilian Captain Marvel look like? I think that would be interesting, you know. But how do we communicate the film? If you have on average, I think three premieres a week of Brazilian titles, I mean, of course, they come out not as evenly, but on average, they all compete with each other. A lot of the experts that we interview, basically everybody agrees. We have to make fewer titles and we have to make them better. And that means very different things. So on the commercial side, it can mean some films will need bigger budgets. If you make action movies locally or regionally, in, for instance, Northern Europe, you know, they can't look cheap. They have to feel they have to look as amazing as the American competition. And that's one way, more money and fewer titles. But it can also be about allowing time for development, because we know from the inside of the film industry, I mean, if you say we have to make fewer titles, everybody will be like, oh no, they will take away my film. No, we will take away the film that even you know will not be good. Sometimes you are developing a movie for a long time and you have a script and then you get your funding and you have to go to work because otherwise you cannot pay your rent and your children will be hungry. Is the film finished? No. When you start shooting, do you know that this will be a great film? Very often you know that it's going to be kind of shit. Like at best it's going to be a pretty okay movie. Those movies we should not make. And this is so hard because the models and the funding systems right now is that once you have sunk all that development money in, you kind of have to make the film if you can, otherwise people will be mad at you because you've lost their money. But losing the production money is so much more expensive than losing the pre-production money. And if nobody sees your film, your production money is gone, it's wasted. So either you have a really good plan for how to connect this film with an audience, or that film should not be made. That is not the same as to say all films have to succeed, because experimentation requires that the whole definition of an experiment is sometimes it fails. You don't know if it's going to succeed or not. So if you make an experimental film, if you have experimental aspects in your storytelling, then of course you might not know that it's going to work. You can test, you can put in more money in development, you can write more versions of the script until everybody feels very confident this is it. Maybe it still fails, but then that's different. That's totally worth it. That money we have to invest because otherwise we will not develop. Yeah, that's hard because right now still it's very difficult to get attention in later windows or other windows, other platforms, if you didn't have that theatrical release. That's a sort of truism, everybody agrees. On the other hand, it's very hard. Like you had the theatrical release and you still don't get the attention. So maybe we have to think in a new way about this. And I think there are two different answers. One answer is, who are the audiences who actually go to the cinema? If you want to make some kind of audiovisual content, I think you should ask yourself some questions like, are there people in the world who care about this right now, other than me and my mother? If it's just me and my mother, maybe I shouldn't be making it with public money, maybe I should be writing a novel. But if I believe that, no, there are definitely people to whom this is important, I need to make this film, it's important for me, it's important for the world. I know who the audience is, great. Where is that audience? If that audience is not in the cinemas, they will not find your film in the cinemas. But maybe they watch movies, because everybody watches movies. People who don't go to the cinemas watches movies all the time. They do it at home. We all watch movies. Most of the movies we watch at home, that's been true since the 1980s at least, because of the VHS tape. So how can I put that film in the home and let those people know about it? Do they belong to, I don't know, like maybe this is very relevant to nurses. Can I work with the nurses unions to communicate this film? Like I don't know, is it school children? Can I do something with, where are the young people? Well, they are not reading daily newspapers, so taking advertising in a daily newspaper is a waste of time. They are maybe on Snapchat. Okay, can I communicate this film on Snapchat? They're gonna watch it on a computer anyway, it doesn't matter. So one question is, where is your audience? How do you put the film where the audience is? And sometimes the answer is, it's not a film. The audience wants it to be a TV show, or the story would work much better as a web series, for instance. Maybe you make a web series. It's not as impressive, or it's not going to take you to Cannes, but maybe you get 20 million viewers in Brazil, and that would be pretty amazing, Then the other question is, I believe that there is an audience, maybe, who want to go to the cinema, but they don't go to the cinema because they don't find the content relevant. They don't find, that it's important enough for them. So I genuinely believe that there are films that could bring new groups to the cinema. And we see it on the commercial side all the time. If you look at the global success of a film like Black Panther, people of color were attracted to cinemas also in countries where they don't often always go because of socioeconomic situations. They would still go to the cinema to see that film because it had relevance. So we have to make the content in the cinemas more relevant to audiences who don't already go. And we also have, this is paradoxical, I know, and we also have to put, for the audiences who don't go, we have to put the content where they are. I write about European cinema in the report a lot because in a sort of, when it comes to production realities and funding structures and things that are happening in the EU on the legislation level, there European cinema exists. But I think perhaps, I think maybe if you ask North Americans, they will say, oh, European cinema, it's one thing. But Europeans don't believe in European cinema. There's only national cinema. And then maybe you are interested, or maybe I'm like interested in first in Swedish film or Finnish film, because that's where I'm from originally. And then Nordic film perhaps, and then, but I'm also interested, I'm a cineast, so I'm interested in French film, I'm interested in Italian cinema and so on. But it's always these national categories. The national is really important. And maybe in the future, even regional will be important. The specific stories travel very well. It's interesting, we don't know why, but when you tell something that is very specific about your culture or about your region or about your city or about a young group of people in a specific city, then it becomes universal. Because then the storytelling, I think perhaps it's because when you tell something specific, you have to go so close to the characters' lives that the storytelling, artistically, it becomes better. Psychologically, those people become more real, and humans respond to that. So then they respond to the portrayals of humanity because they are specific, even though they are different from themselves. I think that quotas are a blunt tool. I wish we didn't have to use them, but I think right now perhaps it's necessary. In Europe last year there was a EU level decision that all the streaming services have to have 30% local content, but what it means is European content, not local as in Swedish, 30% Swedish content in Sweden. It means 30% European content in Sweden. And if you come from a small language group, you know, Sweden is 10 million people or Finland is 5 million people, then it's not going to be very many Finnish movies on Netflix. It's going to be a lot of Spanish movies, it's going to be a lot of Portuguese movies because they work well in Brazil, it's going to be a lot of Irish movies, now that because of Brexit, of course, the UK is going to, but because English works well everywhere. So the big languages are going to be overrepresented in local. So that still doesn't solve the problem. I think it's bad business to ignore the local content. I think if the streaming services are smart, they realize that there will be always a big thirst, a big hunger for the narratives that are in my own language and that are about my own life. And if the global services ignore it, they create a space in the market for local players below them. Yes, maybe Netflix will be dominant in Brazil, like I think it will be dominant in a lot of other markets, but just under Netflix, I think you will have a Brazilian VOD service that will do very, very well, unless Netflix actually starts to provide that kind of content also. And which is better for the Brazilian film industry? I'm not sure. Is it better that the Brazilian film industry is working to keep Netflix bigger and bigger and bigger? Or would it be better for the Brazilian film industry to work very strategically with a lot of local players to make sure that there are challengers for Netflix? I don't know the answer. But then, I mean, for the individual producer, if somebody comes to you with a big bag of money and a lot of artistic freedom, which Netflix often gives, of course you're going to take the money, make the project for Netflix. Because if you have a Brazilian hit on Netflix and I watch it in Sweden, I will become more interested in Brazilian film and TV in general, and that will boost also the independence. These are commercial companies, so they don't have a long-term interest in maintaining Brazilian cinema or protecting Brazilian culture. They have a long-term interest in creating profit for their shareholders. Now, Netflix is different because Netflix has only one business model: subscribers in, production money out, right? And at some point right now they are spending more than they are making, and they have been, you know, that's how they grow. But in the long term, they will need to spend less than they make so that they can be profitable. And when that happens, if they already have an 80%, 90% market share, how much Brazilian content do they need to keep the market share? They need a lot to grow the market share in Brazil. So right now it makes sense for them commercially to have a lot of local content. But in the long run, maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's not in their interest anymore. And that would not be good for the local culture or for the local industry. So public money comes with an agenda to serve the local culture and have a sustainable local film industry, and to represent all the aspects, not just the most commercially interesting aspects of local life. That's why it's so important as a complement. But the other thing, of course, that we don't know is that all of these other new players, Amazon, Apple, and so on, their business models are vastly different. They don't need to be profitable on their content because their profits are coming from other parts of their business. So for them, that equation might be very different. I don't know the answers yet. Maybe next year's report we're going to have to think about this specific thing. When we started, or 2 years ago, maybe we said maybe it's not needed anymore. You know, now it's the market is finding a shape. We will have all the answers. And now I'm thinking,
no.
You know, even today, I think as we speak, Apple is unveiling their strategy for their streaming service. So that's going to be very interesting. I have to look at that before we talk tonight to see what are they doing there, because you would think, I mean, they have invested like $5 billion in content already without telling us what their business model is going to be. I'm not sure they had a business model. I'm not sure they had even decided what to do with the content when they started. They just know that they have to be able to compete in the field. So I think they just ordered a bunch of content while they were figuring out what to do. Imagine companies that are so big and so profitable that they can invest $5 billion in something with an unclear plan. We cannot compete with them on money. No local industry in the world will ever be able to outspend these kinds of players. So we have to compete in completely different ways, and that of course is to compete with relevance, to compete with the locally specific, to compete with genuinely understanding and artistically portraying in new and meaningful ways how people actually live. So you have to be, as an artist, you have to be interested in the audience. And I was thinking this morning that I think maybe every important artistic movement, at least since the mass media and the nation state were invented, has been about somehow reconnecting in a different way with the audience's concerns. So after the First World War, modernism, or in that period, modernism starts. We have a big aesthetic revolution against all of this traditional storytelling of the 19th century. And it was because people were experiencing new things with technology and with the trauma of the whole generational trauma of the First World War, and people who had been in battle and seen horrific things and seen the horror that technology can make. They needed new kinds of storytelling that was not as linear, that was complex, that was more fragmented. And this was we think of this as an artistic movement, but that artistic movement was relevant because it connected to real need in the audience. Mm-hmm. Audiences are really smart. And audiences' lives are way ahead of what the industry, both the commercial industry and the artistic industry, needs. Audiences are super diverse. Audiences are embracing films with diverse casts. Even as Hollywood was saying, nobody wants to watch a movie with brown people, an action movie with brown people in it. Every year, Fast and the Furious was in the top 10. That's a very diverse cast. The evidence is right there, the audience is ready, but the industry was not ready, so they did not see the evidence in front of their own eyes. They did not see the evidence in their own wallet. Now we have, Black Panther and Captain Marvel, and so, like women want to go to the cinema. Yes, women are the majority of, carrying culture everywhere. If you make things for women, women will reward you with money. The audience is much more progressive, and young audiences are so much more. There are many studies that say this. Young audiences are so good at complex storytelling because of how their media consumption works. You can tell such amazing, artistically supercharged stories, very complex, very artistic stories for this audience, if the things that you talk to them about is relevant to them. They will come to you and they will understand. So when people say, oh, young people are not interested in art house cinema, it makes me so mad. Why are you even in this field? Like, if you don't think young audiences will respond to your work, do something else. So different media have different powers, right? Young people love the cinema because of this, because sometimes you need to follow one deep story at great length in a focused way. Sometimes you want to have a short story, in a different way, or over many, many episodes. All of these are valid, but if the audience is not connecting with your work, it's not the audience's fault. They are not lazy, they are not stupid, it's just that what you are making is not relevant to them. And then you have to think very carefully about who you are, but more importantly, you have to think about who your audience is and what lives they are living today. Just that it's very interesting to be in Brazil at this very moment in history because of what is happening in your film industry right now. I didn't realize when I was writing at the end of last year that it would become so urgently true here. And I think the ways that you find paths to solve these problems will be possibly a role model for many countries also in Europe for how to approach this in the future.